You're listening to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Grant Hardy. Ben Fulton is a lawyer, barrister, and solicitor who happens to be blind. He's a crime-fighting advocate who promotes fairness and equality, and I'm delighted to be speaking with him now on the show about the topic of restorative justice. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to The Pulse.
Grant, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show and get a chance to raise some awareness around restorative justice. I think it's an area of law maybe a lot of people don't understand, and I'm always happy to share my knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's one of those terms that restorative justice, I don't know, we've sort of heard of, but I don't think we're really clear exactly what it is. So I'm looking forward to getting into that in just a minute. First of all, though, what drew you to law and criminal law and justice specifically?
Well, I've always seen law as a vehicle for social change, and I wanted to make some real positive improvements in the lives of, everyday people. I started my
Mhm.
practice with a grab bag of human rights. I did some labor law, employment law, human rights law, landlord tenant law, and criminal law. I think is where I really found my niche and was able to explore this concept of restorative justice. Like I say, as a crime fighting advocate, this is how I prevent crimes by focusing on the underlying causes of them, and through the restorative justice process, it becomes transformative, and people learn the skills that they need so that these crimes aren't being perpetuated.
Can we talk a little bit about how crime, intersects with social justice, sociology, some of those social issues?
Well, I do a lot of duty council work, and we're catching a lot of people really at the bottom rung, and
Mhm.
they have so many problems with housing, nutrition. Many people are shoplifting. The basic necessities of life. It's really just a lack of skills and resources. So I realize that a lot of approaches to crime can be prevented if we take a more holistic approach and see that intersection of crime and social resources.
Yeah, and especially these days, it's hard to imagine, the person shoplifting the toothpaste or whatever is, genuinely a horrible criminal. It's likely they're just seriously struggling in life and need some help, maybe rather than punishment, I would think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And we
yeah,
have to get them into those programs where they're getting that help because it's not appropriate. I mean, there's the shop owner to think about, that's their
sure,
business and
of
livelihood
course.
as well. So it's not okay for this to happen. We
No,
just
of
need to
course.
put the programs in place where these needs are being met and it's not, resulting in these criminal offenses.
For sure. So, along those lines, let's talk about restorative justice. First of all, what is it exactly?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that. As the name implies, it seeks to restore. Now, not just the victim, and I use survivor language
Mhm.
to take people out of that re-victimization that occurs frequently so that it's more empowering and enabling people to move forward. So the survivor and then the offender work together to come up with the solution to the damage that's been caused. In a nutshell, criminal law asks, has a law been broken? Who broke the law? And then what should the punishment be? Whereas restorative justice really looks at like the damage that's occurred, how to, make that better. In some ways you can fix it. Sometimes you can just do the best you can. And then
Mhm.
it really digs in on who's accountable, not just the offender. I mean, the offender has to take accountability or it doesn't work.
Mhm.
But then there's also other members of the community that can be brought in to, help this solution actually be effective. So that's kind of the broad overview of restorative justice. It works with the community. A lot of times healing circles are what gets employed. And then through this process, the solution gets crafted and then implemented.
And what would a healing circle look like if that was one of the restorative justice tools that was being used?
Yes. Okay. And this is, I think, one of the biggest, most important tools to focus on is the circle.
Mhm.
So now in the circle, you have a circle keeper. And so this is, like I do volunteer work with Peace Builders. They're an
Mhm.
organization out of Toronto. And so they have volunteer circle keepers that help to make sure this process is running properly, smoothly. Um,
Mhm.
you have the survivor, you have the offender, you may have family members or friends of the survivor and the offender. And then, going beyond that, you might have other community members involved. One of the earliest cases for peace builders and really kind of what set their model
Mhm.
was a, it was actually a sentencing circle. So there's different circles. I like to focus on a healing circle because it can take place before a conviction.
Mhm.
Whereas a sentencing circle, that's a very specific piece of technical jargon, and it,
Yeah.
it takes place after a conviction or a finding of guilt. Okay,
Okay.
so
So
so if you're yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
so yeah, if we're talking sentencing circle, there is a conviction. This person does have criminal record at this point, and we can move forward. So
Mhm.
in this case, it was a sentencing circle up north in the Yukon, I believe, and what had happened was that a youth had basically done something very irrational. He'd gotten
Mhm.
he basically burnt down a hunting cabin. He got it
Mhm.
in mind that that was a good idea, and the judge was saying a typical sentence would be 6 years in jail, but he would consider what the community had to offer. And out of that sentencing circle, there were like other members of the community involved, like the owner of the hardware store actually offered in the circle to set the youth up with like an account so he could get the tools and the materials needed, and that he'd be responsible for paying it all back. So again, this really takes accountability. So the youth had to be
Mm.
accountable for all the tools, all the materials. He had to take responsibility for that. And I mean, the sentence was that he rebuilt the cabin. So, you burn a house, you build a house was kind of the sentence there. And it took a lot of work from the other community members. The cabin was on an island. He had to arrange like a boat to get out to the island and to get the materials out on the boat. So a lot of work had to go into this. And he really saw, what work had gone into creating the cabin in the first place. I think it gave him a lot more respect. And also, he gained the respect of the other community members as they saw him working through this to make amends for his own actions. So that's the thing, is it restores the survivor, and it restores the community relationships. It transforms the offender and restores them as well, so that they now have the skills and the respect of the community and can move forward in a way that doesn't keep them reoffending, and it doesn't keep them at a level of operation that's below what they're capable of.
Oh, that's really kind of cool and very cool, actually. And I think I've heard before too of, obviously a lot less serious, but, say a group of youth who, has vandalized uh, a piece of art or a totem pole, something like that. And they've been required to uh, rebuild, create new art. And it's been really cause a lot of both appreciation on their part of what work has gone into it, but also, like you said, regaining that level of respect that maybe you wouldn't have if you just threw someone in jail for a few years and then expected them to reintegrate. That's kind of the idea, right? Yes.
Yes, exactly. And further, I mean, we've seen there's a lot of stats on the outcomes and how drastically they are when we have a diversion. I mean, diversion is kind of like the tip of the iceberg for restorative justice. A lot of times it doesn't involve the survivors very much, but it does frequently involve the offender doing a lot of upfront
Mm,
participating in counseling or doing community service. So it's the tip of the iceberg. For me, restorative justice truly becomes restorative when the survivor is a more active participant. But nonetheless, the point I was wanting to make there is that with diversions and these other resolutions, the outcomes, especially for the offender, are drastically different in terms of like
mm,
reoffending, in terms of being able to find employment, in terms of the kind of income that they can have if they do find employment. A criminal record can prevent you from applying for a number of jobs if you're required
yep.
to be bonded or vulnerable sector checks. So, for these cases where people are young and immature, offering these diversions or restorative justice solutions, it makes a lot of sense. And there's also an increasing body of knowledge in the psychiatric psychological community showing that there's this later stage adolescence where the frontal cortex isn't fully developed until
Hmm.
closer to about 24 years of age. So this young adult category where people are old enough to be tried as an adult but young enough to be making these foolish decisions is an area where we're really expanding this use of diversion. Out of the United States, there was the Young Adult Diversion Project, which tracked these outcomes over a few years and showed, like I was explaining, improved outcomes across the board.
So restorative justice diversion would be significantly more likely for a young offender, would you say?
Uh,
Likely to be the course that we would take in terms of justice.
yeah, when we're looking at the appropriateness of restorative justice or any diversion for that matter, the age of the offender comes into play. Whether they have a past criminal record,
Mhm.
if this is the tip of them getting into trouble, we can maybe nip it in the bud a little more effectively. Like we're really trying to target that behavior. And also, as a prerequisite, I may have mentioned before, is that the survivor has to be on board for a true restorative justice process
Mhm.
to happen. And without that willingness, we can still look at diversion, but we really can't have a healing circle without the survivor, or even worse, a healing circle with a reluctant participant. That would be even worse. Try to force somebody into this. So I think, when we're looking at it, it just becomes very important to focus on what can be done in the situation.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point that I was going to ask you about later, which is how do you ensure that somebody is taking it seriously and isn't just trying to make a mockery of the situation by asking for a healing circle or, is kind of just trying to, I don't know, get up? Like, how do you determine someone's intention?
Okay, so it is survivor forward. So we start with
Mhm.
that. Without that survivor willingness, I mean, and it usually has to be the survivor who's asking for something like a healing
Okay.
to take place, and then you can talk to the offender about if this is an option they want to explore. Um, Now, then there's a lot of upfront work that happens before that, meetings with the offender, discussions. They may actually need some counseling. Um, it's believed that if somebody has, committed a crime, has hurt someone in this way, that they themselves are also hurt and injured and need healing. So, upfront work in counseling and really doing a deep dive on this person's emotional state and what they hope to get out of it, what they expect to contribute, how are they going to take accountability, what are they willing to do, and through these conversations, and it takes a while, you can really get a good sense of how this person is showing up.
Yeah.
Are
Fair.
they just going through the motions? Can you tell if this is somebody who's not taking it seriously? Um, a lot of people do take it very seriously, and I've heard from a number of people that the restorative justice healing circle process was actually more difficult than just a simple jail sentence.
Mm,
Because, in a jail, you don't actually really have to do anything. You can just
yeah.
do your time. Whereas this is a engaging process and really requires you to confront the consequences of your actions and to think carefully about what you can do to take accountability.
Okay, makes sense. So, in your work, maybe when a case comes before you, um, how do you kind of determine whether that is a type of case that is even eligible for restorative justice, whether it's appropriate, and how would you go about it? Like, especially for say a pre-sentencing healing circle that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So, first, I look at the severity of the incident, the past. I look at the relationship between the offender and the survivor. Uh, there was a case I did a while ago, without getting into specifics, but
Mm-hmm.
it was basically two cousins. They were related through their aunts, and it was kind of a community living arrangement that
Mm-hmm.
degenerated when the one aunt left, and then there were just some people in the house. Like, it was all just the cousins, and a dispute broke out, and there was some violence, and there had been a call actually to the hospital for some medical attention, and then the police were then notified and laid charges. And in this particular case, the survivor was in the hospital giving the statement to the police saying he did not want to press charges.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, this is the problem with our current legal system: is that the state, the crown, assumes the role of the victim, and we know what we say about assumptions, and they get the choice as to whether or not charges are laid. So I saw right away there was survivor participation. I reached out to the survivor, asked if he would, participate in a healing circle. Um, he was, of course, very, enthusiastic about that process. My clients were also interested. And for me, it was also because this family situation occurred within a family. I was thinking about the long term outcomes and benefits. Because, whatever were to come out of that one sentence, they're going to continue to be family and related and interacting for many years to come. So I wanted the solution to focus on the relationship skills that will allow them to have a more peaceful coexistence going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these were loving family members. They didn't want to be hurting each other. They just needed the skills to work beyond it. So by providing them those skills, as I say, I'm fighting crime.
Absolutely. And I know you can't, get into specifics really about any particular um, case, but what are some of the impacts you've seen when you get whatever it is, counseling, um, whatever is sort of decided upon as the resolution? Uh, what sort of impact do you see on the family, the survivor, the perpetrator? What are some of the best impacts you've seen in fighting crime in a restorative justice manner?
It's immense. They're huge. And I think the real thing is the effect it has on the survivor. I'd just like to talk about the case of Marley Liss. This was not a case that I worked on, but one that I'm
Hmm.
familiar with. And I'm actually in a group with the lawyer who did work on her case. We call ourselves advocates for alternative justice models. We changed our name a few times. We were originally advocates for restorative justice. Uh, then there was talk about transformative justice, which is a discipline specifically out of South Africa, that really focuses on that transformative aspect that I talked about, where we're
Hmm.
looking at the offender. So we went with alternative justice models. And okay, the case of Marley Liss was really impressive because Marley herself asked for this, and she was the survivor, and she had to fight really hard to get this solution. I believe she was the first woman in Ontario to get a restorative justice solution for a sex assault charge. And she
Hmm.
wanted to meet with the offender and, talk to him on a very human heart to heart level, that's just not possible in the courtroom. Like the offender never has to take the stand, whereas the survivor does. And they have to
Yep.
give their story under the rigors of a cross examination. So they're literally being grilled on the stand, a very uncomfortable, very often re traumatizing experience. Many survivors report that the process of being on the stand was uh, like as traumatizing as the original incident, as they were like forced to relive it in specific
Hmm.
detail, where their like memory is being challenged at every point as the defense attorney looks for some hole in their story.
Yep.
And she did not want that. She went to a preliminary inquiry and had a small sample of being on the stand, and didn't want to go back. Um, and so this restorative um, justice, this healing circle took place, and she saw like a real breakthrough in the offender. Like, they actually connected on a human level, and he actually shared his own experiences of like suicidal thoughts that had pervaded him after the incident. Like, really showing that this rather serious incident, affected and harmed him as well. So they were like both in need of that healing. And I mean, Marley Liss has, gone very public with her story. She has her own webpage. She's an inspirational, motivational speaker, and she just shares her experience in the hopes that others may be able to share it as well. When these things happen, um, knowing that there is an alternative to the trial justice system is very powerful, and that's what I want people to take away from listening to this interview today.
It's good to know. It's very good to know. It may not be an option for everybody or in every situation, but
Oh no,
it
certainly not every case.
certainly can be a very powerful option in a number of cases. Ben, how does society react to this model of restorative justice, especially when we seem to have a desire for punishment and retribution? That's what I'm seeing. So, how do people react to this alternative model?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I've seen this reaction before. Sometimes people think it's like an easy street, it's an easy pass. The offender doesn't do time in jail, and that somehow lets them go without getting the punishment they should deserve, right? But we've seen in the past, punishment's not working. We still see recidivism rates. A transformative approach is really needed. And the thing is that it's not going to be suitable in every situation, as mentioned. The problem is that the trial system isn't suitable in every situation either. Um, for instance, when we look at conviction rates, they still remain fairly low. And so
Mhm.
I think in over 80% of the sex assault charges that go to trial end in acquittals. And because the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is innocent. It just means that the case was not so airtight as for us to be able to convict and then sentence that person to jail. So, and as I mentioned earlier, this work of engaging with the survivor and other members of the community is difficult work, sometimes actually more difficult than a sentence. I want people to understand that this approach, not used for every situation, but used in some
Mhm.
situations, is actually, superior in those cases in terms of having the offender accept accountability, Because with a trial system, the person can plead not guilty and never take the stand, and that's the end of it. So they never take any accountability. So they have to take accountability. There's that. In terms of the results for the victims, the survivors as well, like
Yeah.
Marley Liss and others can attest to, improved, results there. As you know, the Young Adult Diversion Project can show statistically less crime, less recidivism, better jobs, better places to live. So, this is an approach that's going to be better in many situations. And I'm not suggesting that we do away with the trial system. There are going to be still many cases that are resolved through a trial. We just need to think about our toolbox as having multiple tools and then choose the right tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly right. And when I was talking about carceral or punitive law, I mentioned general too. Obviously, there are going to be those assaults, those people who continually threaten safety that are not suitable for a restorative justice framework. But it's really great to know that it is a possible tool that can be used in the toolbox. Anything you'd like to leave us here today with,
Well,
Ben?
and certainly, as you mentioned, there are people who, pose an ongoing risk. To me, that
Mhm.
seems to be the real value in incarceration is, basically the safety and protection of the public. However, when we're really looking into that, and what I've seen a lot in my career is that those people who need to be separated are very frequently suffering from serious mental health issues. So, we also need better, mental health institutions that are able to, tend to the psychological, the medical needs of the patient. And at that point, they really are a patient, even
Yeah.
though they may be a danger. This danger needs to be mitigated and managed carefully. So that's a whole nother topic that we could do a whole nother interview on the issue of mental health in the law. But I do want to say that, beyond keeping people who are very dangerous safe, that jail
Mhm.
isn't doing a lot of good, and we need to have these other tools. Thank you.
R- Really appreciate you coming on. I hope to get you back in the future to chat more about your work in the legal system. Thank you so much, Ben.
And thank you very much, Grant. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thanks again to Ben Fulton today for joining us on The Pulse for a really informative conversation about restorative justice. You can listen to The Pulse on any podcast platform and watch the video podcast on YouTube as well. I'm Grant Hardy. Thanks for listening.